a nation stuck between a candidate who currently faces 91 felony counts in 4 criminal cases across 2 state courts and 2 different federal districts, any of which could potentially produce a prison sentence, and the president who can't seem to be able to walk to a podium unassisted or even locate the podium, evidently. This would be the second US election where the people face a choice between the same 2 equally irrationally disappointing candidates. What is wrong with the US political pool? Why has running for US elections become seemingly exclusive to retirees? Is there no more room for political success when money speaks loudest? Is democracy in the US critically endangered? For a country with such strategic influence on global politics, the US is facing crippling limitations to its internal political scene, with virtually no hope for an independent candidate ever winning a presidential election. The last independent candidate to ever become president was George Washington. It is pretty much common knowledge that to have any hopes for becoming the next US president, you would have to run under the banner of either major party, the Democrats or the Republicans. For the 2024 elections, the Republicans again saw the former reality TV star Donald Trump to be the candidate who would best address the issues that seemingly trouble America the most: immigration and the economy. Despite unprecedented unfavorability scores in recent polls, Trump is still seen as the candidate who could most readily headbutt Biden once again in the upcoming race. Another fraction of Trump supporters believes in Trump's chance to claim back the race that got him out of the White House in 2020 after losing to Biden in the elections that many Trump supporters deemed unfairly stolen from him. Of course, the sore loser tried his best to sway the elections his way, even after the results were announced, to the extent of filing lawsuits to prove fake voters, rigged voting machines, and other fraud claims with the blessing of election officials and unscrupulous judges. Of course, all the lawsuits were dismissed after or even before the preliminary hearings, even those that were handled by judges he handpicked. Trump is a busy man these days. Along with handling his presidential campaign, he is also tending to 4 major criminal charges against him. On April 15th, he went on a 34-count trial in New York City, where he is facing felony charges related to a 2016 hush money payment of $130,000 to adult film actress Stormy Daniels, made by his then-attorney Martin Cohen, regarding a sexual encounter between Trump and Daniels. In 2018, after initially denying any knowledge of the payment, Trump admitted to reimbursing Cohen for what he called a simple, private transaction. The same year, however, Cohen pleaded guilty to a host of charges and testified that Trump and his company had falsely classified the purpose of the Daniels payment by labeling it as a legal expense. This led prosecutors to conclude that the money given to Daniels was an improper donation to the Trump campaign, while making a false entry in company records is a misdemeanor as per New York state law. Falsifying records to conceal another crime, in this case violation of election law to silence a potential sex scandal, is a felony. It marks the first time in history that a former US president has been tried on criminal charges. With 3 other cases pending trial and the elections coming up on November 5th, it seems that the trial outcomes could be telling of the people's verdict on his candidacy as well. And one day into the trial, he is being held in contempt for apparently not being able to keep his opinions to himself and calling his ex-attorney and Daniels sleazebags. However, it is perhaps his impulsive nature that distinguished him as a president and a public figure. Some analysts suggest that even if convicted, Trump could still be president. The possible punishments he would be looking at would be fines, probation, or even home confinement, none of which would prevent him from swearing an oath. Trump's promises this time are not so different from those from 2016. With a prominent focus on the topic of immigration, he promises to terminate every open borders policy of the Biden administration, stop the invasion on our southern border, and begin the largest domestic deportation operation in American history. He promised to reinstate the travel ban he placed on several Muslim-majority countries and widen the ban list to include Gazan refugees. He also wants to introduce an ideological screening for all immigrants. And he again promised to build the infamous wall between the US and Mexico, while making Mexico pay for it. In reality, though, throughout Trump's presidency, less immigrants were deported than during either period in Obama's presidency, and out of the 1,000-mile-long wall he promised to build, only 453 miles currently stand, most of which were reinforcements for existing walls. With an America First mindset regarding the economy, Trump is proposing a 10% tax on all imported products to support local goods and productions, a move which economists on both sides of the political scene are concerned would lead to a price rise in local products due to increased demand, let alone threaten trade and economic activity. Perhaps most comically, Trump proves his personal vendetta against Joe Biden, as he vows to appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of America, Joe Biden, and go after the Biden crime family, which he later withdrew out of deeming Biden too incompetent to seek revenge on. All this might go to show that perhaps when it comes to who Americans root for as president, it all comes down to confidence and personality, which Trump has a ton of, maybe even too much of. As it currently stands for the other side of this race, things are not going all that well for Biden at all, with polls suggesting his approval rating to hover around 35–40% at most. When we delve deeper, this mostly stems from concerns about Biden's handling of the economy. Despite an all-time record of 6.6 million new jobs added to the U.S. market in his first year of presidency, sending the unemployment rate to the lowest it's been in half a century, Biden faces concerns over the country's inflation rate. However, his bold decisions will seem to take effect on the long run, like the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act, targeting major investments in climate change mitigation and sustainable energy production, significant changes in drug and healthcare policy, and modifications to tax law designed to reduce tax avoidance. The most notable outcomes of the act include Medicare being able to negotiate drug prices for the first time, starting in 2026 with 10 to-be-determined high-cost drugs and a 15% minimum tax on most companies that report $1 billion or more in income to their shareholders, along with an $80 billion investment to hire new IRS agents and increase compliance among wealthy companies and individuals, expected to bring in an extra $203 billion. Biden also attempted credible measures to control gun violence with the bipartisan Safer Communities Act passed in 2022 that led to increased funding for mental health programs and school security, as well as expanded background checks for certain types of prospective gun buyers. Perhaps Biden's acts have been overshadowed by his poor presentability as a strong leader. There's no beating around the bush here. The man is already past the average life expectancy in the US by half a decade. Despite his solid work on development of infrastructure and creating long-term economic solutions, he seemingly fails to convince voters of his efforts. He barely reaches the microphone to talk about them to begin with. Add that to some of his genuine shortcomings, like failing to pass laws that ensure access to reproductive health care. He did back the announcement of CVS and Walgreens selling abortion pills starting March of 2024, calling it a revolutionary milestone, and failing to pass legislation to reform U.S. immigration policies and protect undocumented immigrants to keep families together. Biden's road to a second term is by no means guaranteed. Another noteworthy player in this presidential race will take us on a trip down memory lane. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., running independently for 2024, has consistently been shown on polls to be the most favorable independent candidate, but winning the elections for him would be a long shot. Born to arguably the world's most notorious Democratic family, Kennedy has been denounced by his own family on his bid for presidency, as they called his campaign dangerous to our country. His presence on the list is stirring the Democrats' feathers as well, as some predictions suggest he may withdraw votes from Biden more than Trump, ultimately bringing the odds closer to the latter in this unprecedented race. With his anti-vaccine policy and disdain for both political parties, citing them as corrupt and accusing the Democratic National Committee of rigging the primary election by declining to host debates and making changes to the election calendar, Kennedy's candidacy is a true wild card that could sway voters from either party runner. Some of his controversial statements have included suggesting that prescription drugs are linked to mass shootings, referring to COVID-19 as a bioweapons problem, and promoting the unfounded claim that the CIA was involved in the assassination of his uncle. His polling odds are historically high for a third-party nominee, but his candidacy remains a long shot. With just a few months separating us from the ballots, it seems that this presidential race will end with yet another grossly unfavorable incumbent in the White House. Despite many firsts, the elections most likely would be another neck-to-neck battle between Biden and Trump. The hope for new blood in the political scene would most likely have to wait another 4 years, especially since one of the two most probable presidents-to-be would have no chance of a rerun. Considering the sheer amount of funding required to run a presidential campaign, it seems that the ambition for the White House remains an out-of-reach fantasy for most aspiring new faces in the presence of such business tycoons in the political scene. And after the second time facing such poor candidate choices, one can only hope that new leaders emerge to renew the hopes of more than 160 million American voters and a world that sits by the edge of its seat for their decisions.